Welcome to the Clean Power Hour Live. I'm Tim Montague, your co-host. Today on the Clean Power Hour, there's been a radical shift in Washington. The Senate has now agreed on a climate action bill, which is going to fuel the clean economy to the tune of $370 billion. This is the lead story for today. We might get to some other news, but it's
Maybe,
pretty,
maybe.
pretty exciting. Yeah. Welcome to the show, John Weaver, commercial solar guy, and my co-host. Welcome.
Timothy. Seriously though, how could we talk about anything today other than this new document? If only because we don't have enough experience reading it yet, because it's literally been out for 12 hours. That would be the only reason we don't spend the whole hour talking about this document. So that's my opinion.
Yeah, everybody thought the Build Back Better bill was dead on arrival. Manchin, just last week gave a final, I'm out, forget about
Yep.
it. And then yesterday, fairly late in the day, I can't remember what time it was, but they made a deal and made a public announcement with Chuck Schumer and our friend Joe Manchin. Um, and, and they renamed the bill. You were saying in the pre-show that you thought that was one of the vital things. What's the new name, and why do you think the new name is the key?
All right, so the new name is the Inflation Something Act, Inflation Reduction Act of 2022.
Yeah.
And that's important because right now, of course, politics. We know what's going on in the world in the United States with post-COVID economic happenings. Inflation's been up over the last 6 months very aggressively. Price of gas broke over $5. It's now pulled back 20-25%. We had a war in Europe, and we had a post-COVID weird bump in demand, manufacturing, all kinds of stuff. And with that, the country has been saying that the cost of life, the cost of living, is the biggest issue. Manchin, over the past couple of months, has been saying inflation, over and over. And maybe this was part of his plan. Maybe this has been a plan between him and Schumer for a while. Apparently, there was another document that I've been reading a little bit from the political folk, a CHIPS agreement, which is based on literally computer microchips, similar to how we're trying to onshore solar manufacturing. We're trying to get more computer chips manufactured in the U.S. Senate Republicans, McConnell, the head Senate guy for the Republicans, he said that he would not sign the CHIPS agreement if this climate, clean energy, etc. bill was even being considered. He'd trash it. And the CHIPS bill was signed hours before Manchin and Schumer made their announcement. So there's just all kinds of interesting stuff. This inflation title, they took so much of the Build Back Better, but by now the Build Back Better name has probably been poisoned by the news and by the fact that Manchin has rejected it twice and associated it with more inflation. So a little bit of political jiu-jitsu. You just change the name and re-recognize what's going to happen. Instead of building back better, you make it an inflation attacker because cheap electricity is deflationary. And the document actually has some really nice taxation items. For instance, there's a global minimum 15% corporate tax for any businesses that make $1 billion or more. Those are the companies that often pay no taxes, like Amazon, because they figured out, how to game the system. So it's an interesting document. There's like $700 billion in economic savings versus $500 billion in total costs, including the $370 billion that was associated with clean energy, climate type actions. So it's
Yeah, I like that. I like that 15% minimum corporate tax. The reality of our current day is that many large corporations are paying zero or very little tax, and let's face it, that's just not right. It's not fair. We as as tax-paying citizens are paying our dues. for all of the public goods that we have, education, infrastructure, healthcare, et cetera. And corporations are very much part of society. In fact, our society has decided that corporations have the same rights as individuals. I don't agree with that, but that's what society has currently decided. Our democracy has decided, and so we they have to pay their fair share. Um, and they're making money hand over fist, and inflation isn't necessarily bad for corporations. It's bad for us little folk. It's bad for consumers. It's very hard on the pocketbook of consumers. um, but yeah, that's just flat out wrong, and needs to be fixed. But let's talk about some of the solar storage and wind related items in
Yes.
this bill. It is it is a new day, right? We're extending the ITC, for example. Um, I think it was a 10-year extension. Is that right? At 26%,
30.
30. So we're going back
Yes.
to 30. Um, Back to the future to 30%, which is wonderful. The investment tax credit is one of the most important clean energy incentives in the United States right now, bar none. If you have a tax burden, you can write off 30% of the value now of a solar or solar and storage if you combine it. Although now that's a misstep, right? That was a mantra I had, but now that's no longer relevant because there's a standalone storage incentive now too, isn't there?
Yes, sir. Yep. Same exact ITC, just standalone storage.
And so you can take your rooftop, uh, you could take your rooftop project, you can retrofit it, but you could also just install a battery and take that generous incentive. Here in Illinois, my listeners know we have very generous storage incentives, $250 per kWh. So batteries are cash positive in 2 years. Heretofore, you had to pair the battery with a solar array in order to take the ITC, but now that's out the window, and you can just put a battery in, and you should, because it provides tremendous resiliency. It's good for the grid, and it's good for if the grid is unstable in any way.
Yeah, there's EV, $7,500 for EVs. There's rules. I think $55,000 maximum for cars, $80,000 maximum for SUVs. There is a $4,000 tax credit for buying a used EV. So I thought that was kind of neat.
Yeah.
There's a geothermal investment tax credit that goes through 2025. There's support for solar manufacturing. So I haven't read the details for a few months, but I believe it's similar to the way it was. There's money in there to incentivize wafers, solar cells, solar panels, panels integrated with inverters integrated. So incentives for what's they're called, Enphase and
Microinverters.
microinverters. Yes, there we go.
Yeah,
Jeez.
or AC solar panels.
Yeah, AC solar panels, perfect. The investment tax credit is 30%. There is a direct pay option now only for certain non-taxable entities. So there's no direct pay option for residential or commercial. But if you got a church, if you have a municipal electricity utility that wants to own a power plant, these groups can't really make use of tax benefits in general.
Right.
Now they can. Now they can get a direct paycheck. So that's pretty solid. I'm actually working with a homeowners association in Washington, D.C., and we're exploring this document to see if their corporation type can benefit from this direct pay opportunity. And it affects how we're going to finance, because they were thinking about paying cash, but they wanted to save some money, so we were leaning operating lease. But now, with a 30% tax credit, it's actually better than the operating lease and none of the paperwork headache. And since they have the cash and they're ready to deploy it, great. So So that's something I'm looking at as well. I don't have many church projects and nonprofit projects, but hey, it's interesting
Yeah,
to
I have
see.
a couple nonprofit projects that are definitely going to be impacted in a positive way. So that's great. And I love this line. This is the New York Times story on this, which is on screen. Senate Democrats estimate that the legislation would enable the United States to cut greenhouse gas emissions by 40% below 2005 levels by 2030, putting the nation within striking distance of the aggressive climate goals laid out by Mr. Biden last year. And and then furthermore that this is roughly the pace that scientists say the world must follow to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees C,
Wow.
2.7 degrees Fahrenheit above pre-industrial levels, the threshold beyond which scientists say the likelihood of catastrophic floods, fires, storms, and drought increase significantly. So this is a big deal and a very good thing for the United States, for the economy, and for the globe, really, right? Because we're such a large economy and large emitter of greenhouse gases. We're a mere 5% of the population of the world, but our carbon footprint is something like 20%, isn't it, of global emissions? It's much greater. It's
We're
4x.
close. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Um, so we have a huge role to play in decarbonizing the global economy. For those of our listeners who don't know, the economy is 40 gigatons of greenhouse gases per year, and then so that's what we need to net zero, right? We need to reduce 40 gigatons of emissions from industrial applications, from the grid, from transportation, from food systems, et cetera. And then we need to figure out how to remove 800 gigatons that are sitting there in that giant trash heap known as our atmosphere. And I've started to feel rather comfortable calling it that, John, even though it doesn't look like a trash heap. That's what it is.
That's how we're treating it. I wouldn't call it that because it's a wonderful place, our atmosphere.
It is our lifeblood. Without the atmosphere, we're toast in so many ways. We can't breathe. We can't have plants. We can't have food. We can't have protection from radiation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. um,
It's there's no carbon tax, but having these incentives that are technology specific seems to be how American voters prefer things. And I've seen a lot of research talking about that. We voted against carbon taxes regularly. Like lots of people we just don't seem to like this nebulous carbon tax concept. But we're okay with doing essentially the same thing, the same dollar amount maybe, but applying it specifically to technologies like wind. The production tax credit was extended and bumped, so that'll go forward. And come 2025, solar can do the production tax credit. I'm really interested to see if utility scale solar above 10, 20, 30 megawatts starts to leave the ITC and move to the production tax credit. I assume at a certain price, if you're building at a dollar a watt, 80 cents a watt, and you do a 30-cent tax credit, it's only worth, or 30%, it's only worth 24 cents a watt. But what's that 1, 2, 3 cents per kilowatt hour applied out over decades when
mhm.
your project is only priced at 3 cents per kilowatt hour? I mean, you're like doubling your revenue. Well, I don't know how the production tax credit works. It's a tax write-off on a per kilowatt hour basis, I think. So you're just not paying taxes on revenue. So bam, 20, 25% more revenue.
Mhm.
I, I'm just interested to see how that plays because
But
I've never
so
been in a project with a PTC.
with the yeah, we're on thin ice here because the PTC applies to the wind industry, um, and it's a cousin to the ITC. But does that mean that wind developers don't get an upfront incentive?
I do believe wind developers can actually use the ITC historically. Again, this is a solar guy talking, but
Yeah.
I think they have a choice. But the PTC is always better at scale. When your project is at scale and your cost per unit is way down, the PTC is better over its period than the ITC is.
So if you're listening, please comment
Yeah.
below, either live or in the recording, about the PTC versus the ITC. We would love to hear from a subject matter expert on the wind PTC production tax credit. And John thinks that there might be a flip flop. Is that what you're saying, where the PTC for solar eclipses the ITC?
Yeah, so first off, and this is me reading other people tweeting about it, but it looks like come 2025, the PTC, the production tax credit, can be applied to solar projects. And there's going to be a certain point, and the spreadsheets will dictate it, when the value of the PTC will increase the rate of return and the time value of money more than the tax credit will. And this is because at scale, at large sizes, the project cost is so low relative, like on a residential project, 30% is $1 per watt. That's equivalent to the cost of a utility scale project. Mm-hmm. So when you get down to an 80 cent per watt, 90 cent per watt construction, you're only saving 27 cents. That's still good money. It's 30% of the project. But when you can apply a PTC to every single kilowatt hour, there's a spreadsheet flip-flop. And to the best of my knowledge, wind people have had the option to go ITC, but have gone PTC because the numbers make sense. And so I assume that at some point, the spreadsheet will show, hey, this PTC is worth more. It makes my project worth more to a third-party investor than this one-off ITC does. And I don't know what size project that is. I bet it's above 20 megawatts, but I don't know. I don't know exactly.
Yeah. So the New York Times points out that there's $30 billion in incentives in the bill for companies to build solar panels, wind turbines, and batteries to process critical minerals in the United States, aiming to reverse the longstanding migration of clean energy manufacturing to China and elsewhere. This is a vital point, right? Industrial policy is mission critical. We need good industrial policy in order to reshore manufacturing. We used to be a manufacturing powerhouse. Manufacturing provided the foundation for a strong middle class, starting in the early 1900s when we industrialized. And we've now sent all those jobs to Mexico and to Southeast Asia, where labor is very cheap and environmental standards are very low. And that's just not good for our economy, and it's certainly not good for climate change. So we have to bring those jobs back. And this really does work. We have companies like Qcells, the Korean solar panel maker, which I just love their solar panels, and we're very fond of them at EDPR. They're just a fantastic product, and they're building a factory in Georgia. They're expanding the factory in Georgia, and there's probably half a dozen other solar panel makers that will pursue factories in the United States with these incentives.
Yes, a lot of them. I've seen lists of them. I watch them, watch the announcements. It's coming. Absolutely.
Our friends at Meyer Burger are building a factory in the United States. Who else? Helion is building a factory in Florida, right?
Nah, they're repurposing an existing factory in Florida.
Oh.
Yeah. I happen to know that one very well. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then
there's a list. There's a list of companies who've said they're going to build in Florida if the right taxes come through. So it's coming.
And then the other element here that I love, I'm gonna put this back on screen. How do I do that? Ba-boom, ba-boom. Okay, so The bill also includes $60 billion to address disproportionate burden of pollution on low-income communities and communities of color, $27 billion for a green bank aimed at delivering financial support to clean energy projects, and $20 billion for programs to cut emissions in the agriculture sector. I'm not exactly sure how green banks work, but I just know that they are a very good thing. Uh, they are basically monies set aside for green infrastructure projects, and they increase access to select populations, in this case, low income populations who are disproportionately burdened. And it's easy when you live in a middle class suburb or micro urban setting like I do here in the Midwest to forget that, we have huge populations of people that live in dirty environments that are contaminated with pollution from power plants, from landfills, from incinerators. And, and what this does is it shortchanges children when they're very young and vulnerable biologically and need all those brain cells the most to get a leg up in life. And we're handicapping them. And this is very well documented. My father is a lifelong environmental justice activist and author of basically translating scientific literature into layman's terms, documenting the impacts of all of these industrial hazards and how we have just we have made an agreement as a society that this is okay, and so we need to undo that, and so this bill has elements that are very good for environmental justice or a just transition. And I would point our listeners to all of our content at cleanpower.group or cleanpowerhour.com. You can see all of our content there. And just this week, we published an interview with McKenna Dunbar, who is an EJ activist in the Virginia area. She is the building electrification lead at the Tierra Club. So I would encourage people to check that out at cleanpowerhour.com. Please subscribe to the show on YouTube and give us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. That helps others find this content. So, John, what else is interesting and exciting about the former Build Back Better? That does roll off the tongue a little better than the Inflation Reduction Act, but anyway, we're just jumping up and down for joy here that the United States could once again be a player in climate action. This isn't a done deal. We're not saying that, but it looks like there is enough votes in the Senate to get this across the finish line.
There's a person in Arizona who has some influence, and we have some challenges with her. So we'll see about that opinion. Looks like it should be able to move through the Democratic House. And it looks, if the Arizonan senator votes for it, then that's 50 votes. And this is reconciliation. So yeah. In reference to another exciting thing, I put a tweet into the document, which was from Michelle Davis, the distributed solar expert at Woodmac Renewables and Power. And it's power and renewables, but they're going to be renewables and power eventually. Eventually, it's just going to be Woodmac Renewables. And the cool thing about her chart, and this is data they've done before, it's rough, but they project that an additional 36% of solar, 55 gigs worth, could be installed through 2027.
Mm-hmm.
So that's some volume. The dark blue you see there is based on the ITC disappearing this year and next year, going from 26% this year to 22% next year. and then 10% thereafter. Whereas the light blue is now with the Build Back Better. Well, it's probably based on Build Back Better data, because that document there, they probably didn't make it overnight, but you never know. Michelle works hard. So that's the 55 gigs. I mean, that's 50%. It's a little less than 50% of what we have deployed in total right now. So pretty significant.
Yeah, we have about 100 gigs deployed, right?
120, 125.
Mm-hmm. And I thought we were on pace in 2021 approaching 20 gigawatts. This doesn't. This says we're closer to 15. But am I recalling that incorrectly? That we were on pace for 20 gigawatts already?
I think we're like, for the year, we were in the mid 20s, and then we had a really slow Q2, and so I don't know where we're at a pace right now, but the Q1, Q2 report just came out from Clean Power America, and they showed how low our Q2 numbers were. So I'm not positive exactly where we're on pace for right now, but at some point we were in the mid 20s. At some point we were in the high 20s. Then we got pulled back to the mid-low 20s. So we're definitely at a pace above 20 gigs, but I don't know the exact value going forward. So, but this should pump a little more volume. Not much. It's it may help some. Well, it depends when this goes into effect. If this, I haven't seen the exact language, but does this start January 1st of next year? If so, it's not going to motivate anything this year. In fact, who knows? It may slow a person down or two from turning the switch on this year, letting it turn on next year to get an extra bump in efficiency, in a tax credit. So we'll see on that. But it's pretty cool. Pretty cool thing happening overall. Yeah, we'll see.
And in related news, MISO made a big announcement this week. Should we talk about that?
Yeah, you know what? We're good on this topic. We just covered half the show on this topic, so that's a good start. We'll probably talk about it later, everybody. But the MISO announcement, I think, is awesome, and this is the second time MISO has done something like this with transmission that no one else in the nation seems to be able to do. So what are they doing in MISO? Do you know how they were able to figure this out? Are they just a bunch of nice people up there in the upper Midwest?
Well, I would say they're they're nicer than their cousins at PJM.
Right.
I don't know what PJM's problem is, putting all of the interconnection applications on hold for 2 years. I think that's an unmitigated disaster. And
we just got two of our projects. The feasibility analyses were pushed back another 6 months for two of our PJM projects, the small ones that we snuck in just to experiment. And so it's like, great guys,
Yeah. And you had to get PJM approval for those?
Yes. Yeah. We decided to experiment with PJM in Pennsylvania because we had a whole bunch of projects signed and we just wanted to see what would happen. And we thought, hey, let's blow 10, 15 grand in interconnection fees just to see what it's like. And we're learning that nobody talks to us.
So MISO is the Mid-Continent Independent System Operators, and their board of directors approved 18 new high-voltage transmission lines a couple days ago, setting the stage for adding 53 gigawatts of renewable energy to the grid. So, when you're developing a utility-scale solar, wind, or battery storage project, you have to get interconnection with the ISO, the independent system operator, which is the supergrid above your local grid. And, developers are always complaining that the process is extremely slow and burdensome. And I don't know that is necessarily changing, but this in this case, they're approving new transmission, which is vital for moving energy around, right? That's the bottom line. This is the superhighway for electrons over large distances. And as we saw with the heat wave in Texas, and we reported on this last week, where you have really cheap wind power in some places or cheap solar. And then if it can't get to market though, it's no bueno and does the economy no good, and it hurts consumers and business owners because energy prices spike, there's huge capacity charges or demand charges, and um, that's just very painful and hurts economic growth. So so this is a big deal, and it says the decision. This is a story in Energy Wire. It says the decision marks the most U.S. power lines ever approved at once and was hailed by climate advocates as a model for the nation. Board of directors for MISO greenlit the $10.3 billion investment in the tranche of lines. And now this isn't going to come online until 2028. So this is a long-term plan. But bravo for MISO. And I just we had John, we had a podcasters roundtable last week, and one of the questions was about transmission versus what was the juxtaposition? It was transmission versus production, I guess. What's more important? And there was unanimity that transmission is a vital problem for grid modernization and the energy transition writ large. It does us no good if we're greening the grid, but the grid is fractured and dysfunctional. Imagine the United States without the highway system that we have, right? That system was a complete game changer following World War II when it was built with huge subsidies from the federal government. Would not have happened without the government. That's what the government is good for, right? Is for these big infrastructure projects that private companies just will not take such risk to engage in. And we have to think big. There's just no buts about it. Any other thoughts on the MISO story?
We can get around transmission, but it involves more solar, more wind, and a whole lot of batteries. And least cost is without transmission. So if we want cheaper energy, we want transmission. If we want more batteries and more local infrastructure, fine, we can do it, but it's going to take a little longer. It's going to take a lot more work, and it'll be harder. I like this transmission. This is very unique transmission, lots of small lines in a region. MISO prior had done a lot of transmission in the early teens, and one of the things I learned about it is that they were successful because of local stakeholder investment. They met people who would be affected by the power lines, and they gave them stuff, cheap internet, better lease prices. They made sure everybody got a little piece. So, these power lines have been approved. They've not yet been, they've been approved by the utility. They've not yet been approved by everybody else, though. And I'm sure they've worked very hard to pick out lines that they thought would get approved. But we'll see. There's still a lot more work to do to get it over things. So
I heard about a story, and I don't know if this is true, but somebody is planning to put transmission lines inside unused gas infrastructure. So we have some millions of miles of gas pipelines across the U.S., and apparently some sizable percentage of them are unused. And so you could theoretically put transmission lines underground inside these pipes, which sounds like a brilliant idea, because that's one of the problems with permitting transmission, right, is that there's a lot of NIMBYism. People don't want these big towers running through their backyard, and I can't blame them. That can be painful. Of course, the developers do their darndest to keep them away from population centers, but you have to get near the population center anyway, right? Because that's where the power is being used. But putting them inside existing infrastructure that's unused. Sounds like a brilliant idea. So look forward to learning more about that. I think Mike Casey was the one who brought that up. So we just published the Podcasters Roundtable also. You'll find that at cleanpowerhour.com. You've got a story from NASA, John, about Mars. What's the story?
You gotta click on the image. There we go. Come on. Look at this. This is like a robot something or other going on Mars. So
it's a robot party, yeah.
Yes. So NASA stated via this press release that they have finalized the project requirements for bringing material back from Mars, 2032-ish. And that machine down in the lower right, I believe, is the unit that will land and have that rocket inside of it. That rocket will be filled up by some other machine. The rocket will launch into space, and I believe that satellite that's in the top center will capture it, and it has a piece attached that takes it back to Earth. And so that's why I'm sharing this, is because we're now going to put some rockets on Mars that can launch into space and bring back some dirt. And so, man, that's cool. So that's really all. I just want to hang out on rockets on Mars. With robots, with flying robots and rolling robots. And, Mars is populated by like 10, 15, 20 robots in space, on the surface. It's kind of neat.
Yeah, I mean, it's not unlike the SpaceX approach, and maybe SpaceX will beat them to it. They certainly have ambitions of going to Mars sooner than 2033, I think, but they also had plans to roll out full self-driving before 2033, and they're struggling with that. I don't lament not having full self-driving, and because it doesn't exist. Empty promises, Elon, empty promises, but we do love you, Elon, even though you're crazy, and you should just forget about Twitter and get busy going to Mars.
Who knows? Maybe Tesla or SpaceX will be involved with that. So that's good. But yeah, go to Mars, man. Let's do some cool stuff. I mean, the main reason for me to go to Mars and spend money on space is so that we can build the satellite and ship infrastructure to start manufacturing and mining in space. So there's that. I want to see us do some manufacturing and mining in space, and I think that's going to be pretty cool when we do it, because it'll make the world better.
Yeah. Well, you found a really cool story about floating solar on the ocean, and I've had this same exact thought. These guys have made it look super cool and feasible. So kudos to RWE. And what's the story? CNBC, nonetheless. Like,
yeah,
nice to see clean energy news going mainstream.
Well, so what it is there's a company called Sea Duck, and they don't really show the image of Sea Duck, but they have this triangular ocean floating thing that brings the panels up above the water, and it makes it so that waves and it can lift. And so they're working for ocean deployed solar power, which is important, and which is cool. And it's cool because now they're trying to integrate ocean-based solar power with wind, with existing wind. And wind plus solar are complementary. We have daytime, we have nighttime, we have wintertime, we have summertime. But the power line that leaves that site, it's got to be sized to maximize the wind output. Now, the solar is going to be making use of it. And relative to our energy needs, if we were to start building stuff on the ocean, we would have massive over generation. So we have so much space on the ocean from a wind and solar perspective that if we could figure out how to build power lines from 500 miles out that are financially viable, we could power the world 10 times over, 100 times over. The same argument we always have about the amount of land or the amount of sunlight that hits the earth in a minute and 5 minutes. We start moving into the ocean with wind and solar integrated facilities where that's future type stuff. That's weird futuristic type stuff. And I'm down with weird futuristic type stuff. So yeah, I this is just, and the key thing is they have a little headline. They say their unit's going to flow over the ocean like carpet. That's a weird visual, but okay, sure, go for it. If you can figure that out, then yeah.
Yeah. I see no reason technically why this isn't feasible. It occurs to me, that when you've got this network of floating floating wind, right? The wind turbines are floating but anchored, and then you could easily repurpose those anchors to also anchor the floating solar arrays. So anyway, they have planned a 0.5 megawatt pilot project that's going to get built off the coast of Belgium if it comes to fruition. And the project is called Merganser, which is a kind of duck. So that's kind of cool. And
Right.
it's a joint Norwegian-Dutch initiative. So go Vikings. And in my mind, really the greatest technological challenge is probably the corrosion resistance of the solar panels. Like the ocean is very corrosive, so how do you keep that stuff from falling apart? But
Yeah. They
doable.
mentioned that bird poop is going to be a huge issue that they have
Mm,
to fully solve for because bird poop is corrosive
yeah,
itself.
super acidic.
Yeah. So it's like, oh, wow. Just challenges and challenges you got to learn about when you start doing new things.
It's so corrosive that that can be a major issue for power lines in some places where the birds congregate on the power lines, and their poop eats through the wires. So it's definitely a thing. I was just talking about bird droppings on another project we're working on in Chicago. That's not a floating solar project. It could have been, but the DNR rained on that parade. Um, and But we're planning just a flat mounted project that I can't say much about, but it's it's a place where there's a lot of birds because seagulls like Lake Michigan.
You got to get one of those Earthos robots that can always, that are associated with your system and can
Yes,
always drive on it and clean it.
yeah, I think that's going to be the key. Is cleaning robots, and then then it's okay. And the birds. I mean, they already have a system to scare the birds away. It's apparently uses light, but it's imperfect, and there's still lots of birds on the roof. So just regular cleaning would be a good solution, and then everybody's happy. As long as you can keep those robots running. Um,
A little bit of O&M.
yep.
I like our robot future. Well, I have a scary article on the bottom of our document if we want to see something whack about robots.
Yeah. Robots are a double edge, and we've talked about this on the show periodically. They can be used for good or evil, and once they get a mind of their own, it could be kind of, yeah,
Kind of absolutely terrifying.
kind of absolutely terrifying. Yeah. You really want me to put this on screen, huh?
Heck yeah. Look at that. Zoom in on it. Click on it. Just a little robot with a machine gun attached. Now somebody said that's not the real Spot
Yeah.
robot.
Yeah.
That's a knockoff. But I
But is
mean,
that do you really think that's a real video? I mean, I've seen. Uh,
uh,
I think it's a simulation, but
sure, maybe, I don't know. It could be. If it is, wonderful, but it's not very far from what's happening. What's going to happen? I mean,
Yeah,
there's a gentleman who already used this robot in Hawaii to put a heat sensor on it so that they could specifically detect humans who were hiding in near the beach and in the woods near the beach in a homeless camp. And they put the heat unit on there so that they could find individuals whose body temperatures were higher
yeah,
because of COVID. So we're integrating human heat seeking
yeah.
robots, So it's like, great. It's like a pit viper. It's like, oh, there's a warm thing. Let's go kill it and eat it. So, all right, let's talk about something nice, right?
Technology is double edged. We have to be careful. We have to plan for safe AI. That's my mantra, safe AI. AI is good, but we have to make it safe.
I want my own AI, like, that's going to sit on my shoulder, that will always be scanning around me via some Wi-Fi and Bluetooth and all kinds of RF frequencies, so that whenever somebody tries to hack me, it fights back for me.
I want a robot assistant that will help me be more productive and help me not be the, forgetful, mistake-making human that I am, uh, as a backstop and a buddy. Um, there are many great, good applications for narrow AIs. I
Mm-hmm.
just think we should be very careful about an AGI. Not that the robot we just showed on screen would be an AGI. That's just a robot soldier, basically. So, well,
Yeah.
we've got a story from PV Magazine by Sandra Enckhart.
Yes.
Industrial process for mobile solar module recycling.
So the goal of the unit that is in that article, that piece of hardware right there, is
Yeah.
to fit in a shipping container so it can be delivered to sites when they're decommissioned and recycle it right there. Really interesting, because I've been told that the cost of transporting the solar panels is one of the biggest recycling costs.
Hmm.
So, can we ship the recycling unit to the site and cut down on things? Kind of neat. Kind of neat. So, first off, I love all the recycling stuff because it pushes back against all the arguments that weirdo fossil people suddenly say, hey, you guys are going to put stuff in a landfill. And as you so eloquently said, they're dumping it in our freaking sky garbage trash pile. So, but whatever. Now we can
So
say, nah, we're not gonna. We're just gonna deliver
I
a
have a
shipping
question
container.
about this, though. I'm not opposed to the concept. Of course, we have to figure out how to recycle solar panels and make them to be more recyclable. That's my.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm a broken record, but that's my mantra. Make them more recyclable. They are hard to recycle. You can find them and grind them, and that's kind of what is happening now. But wouldn't, if you set up this mobile unit, John, wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
you still have a huge waste stream, a recyclable waste stream, uh, coming off the site still that has to be transported elsewhere back to a factory that's going to make new solar modules out of this material? That would be the most logical thing to do. Um, so I'm not.
Yeah.
So I don't. I guess I don't follow.
Well,
What's
you
the
save one trip. You save a trip of solar panels to a factory, and the leftovers would go from factory to new factory. Leftovers go into a new factory either way. So that's the trip is either starting
Yeah,
from a
but how does it
factory that's
reduce transportation? Period.
okay. So you have a solar plant. Let's say it's in Kansas. You have a recycling facility that's in Champaign. You have a bunch of manufacturers that are in Chicago.
Yeah.
So the logic is, and I may have picked a wrong set because you have to go past Champaign from Kansas City, but whatever. Pretend I picked a perfect triangle: Chicago, Champaign, and Wisconsin over there somewhere. And so the guy in Champaign who's got the recycling factory, the modules have to be driven from the farm to Champaign. That trip right there is the one that's going to be saved, because once you recycle the panels and chop them up in Champaign and have to deliver them to Chicago, that's the same trip. It's either from the solar field or from the factory, the recycling factory. So the key is you bring the factory to the field, chop everything up there. You don't have to load the trucks the first time. You don't have to drive them to Champaign to unload the trucks. You just do the Champaign work in the field. So that's from a shipping standpoint. That's my lot. That's the logic I see. Is you can save your first trip from the field to the recycling facility.
Yeah. Okay.
That's all I see so far. Otherwise, it's just cool,
Couldn't you
gimmicky.
just build the, I would say, kludge on the recycling facility to the solar panel manufacturing plant, and then just take the modules that are going to be repurposed out of the field to the factory, which is also a recycling facility. Because the same amount of material has to be moved, right? You can't leave it. The material is all coming off the site. In terms of the modules, the racking can just stay there and repower the plant. And that is one of the most common questions is, well, what happens after 20 years or 30 years? And you just take off the old modules and put on new ones, and maybe install some new inverters. The inverters are being replaced as the plant ages anyway. So some of the inverters may have plenty of life left in them. But yeah, recycling.
I just like the recycling. I'm gonna share every stupid, weird recycling thing you ever see, because until the weirdos stop talking about recycling, I'm just gonna respond, and you're gonna have a hand recycler, just so you can like break solar panels with your baseball bat, and then just I don't know.
Yeah,
we'll get better at it. We're gonna get better at it. That's what matters. That's the long game.
yeah. You have a story about solar glass, and we'll wrap up here too. Maybe this will be the last story, but the glass industry in general in the U.S. is diminutive. We don't have a big glass industry in the U.S. anymore, and that includes solar glass. So, what's the story about solar glass? And I'll put this on screen.
QCell in Georgia signed a contract with a Canadian firm, maybe an MOU, some sort of document, to buy from them enough solar glass to cover 100% of the manufacturing needs, which is roughly 3 gigs a year. So cool. So this place is going to build a 4 gigawatt a year solar glass facility in Canada, and they say that the site has the ability to grow 4x. So hypothetically, we could have a 16 gigawatt glass facility up here in Canada, which would be more than half, 3/4 of this year's capacity. Now, these won't come on for a few years, and they need customers. But hey, that's potential. Glass. Awesome.
Canadian Premium Sand is the company. Interesting.
Sand.
And makes sense. You make glass out of sand. It is another form of silicon. And they call it pattern glass. What is the pattern aspect of the glass? Do you know?
I don't know exactly, but I know that there's a lot of etchings in the surface of solar glass in order to affect the reflection of the photons as they're coming in and then bouncing. And so you want to keep them inside of the cell,
right?
Yeah. Well, actually, you want to minimize reflection when they're first coming in, but then once they come in, and some of the photons bounce off the solar cells and hit the glass again, you want to maximize the reflection on the inner layer. So these patterns, I don't know exactly how they interact, but they do account for getting through the first time and capturing the second time, because if you can get them to bounce a little bit inside of your solar cell, your area, you got another chance of grabbing that photon and lighting up an electron and pushing that current.
So that story referenced an earlier story by Tim Sylvia about Solar Energy Manufacturing Act. Is that embedded inside this new climate action bill, do you think?
To the best of my knowledge, I've seen some references to the numbers. I haven't explicitly looked at them, but yes. So if you scroll down just a tiny bit on this article, there is a description of the cents per watt for each of the subcomponents. I believe it's in this article. It could be a different one that Tim wrote. But yes, this act is integrated into the inflation, whatever thing.
Yeah, the Inflation Reduction Act.
There you go.
Yeah, it says modules would receive a credit of 11 cents multiplied by the capacity of the module. Cells would receive 4 cents multiplied by the capacity of the cell. Wafers would be credited at $12 per square meter. And solar grade polysilicon would receive a credit of $3 per kilogram. Solar grade polysilicon is another material that we make precious little of, virtually zero, but it's not zero, but it's very little. We used to make more, and I saw a chart recently. I'm not going to be able to dig it up here on the fly, but it really took a dive. I don't know, around 2016, something like that.
Yep. That's when China enacted an import tariff against foreign polysilicon.
Yeah.
And it was a tit for tat, because that's around the time that the United States integrated a tariff against China for maybe stealing secrets or dumping.
Yeah.
Could be the 2014 tariff. And then they said, okay, we will respond. And here's how we'll do it. And there goes and they also whacked the South Korean polysilicon industry via this same action.
Well, I want to give a shout out to Russ Bates. Thanks for the comment about First Solar. They are expanding their plant in Ohio, but thanks for being on the live here, Russ. Look forward to catching up with you sometime soon. And with that, John, let's wrap up the show. How can our listeners reach you, Mr. Commercial Solar Guy?
CommercialSolarGuy.com. That's the best way. Find our contact page. You can see a couple of projects. Really got to update my website. I do all this writing for some other website. I don't write for my own website. It's terrible. But CommercialSolarGuy.com. Twitter, Solar in Mass. If you like Twitter, and LinkedIn, of course. Post on LinkedIn. But it's CommercialSolarGuy.com.
And in general, what kind of connections are you looking for? What kind of outreach would you like to get more of?
I'd love more residential solar projects on the south coast of Massachusetts. More commercial construction in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. Consulting opportunities nationwide. Project development opportunities nationwide.
Very good. Well, you can find me at TG Montague on Twitter or Gmail. And my two websites are cleanpowerhour.com and cleanpower.group. All of our content is on both of those websites. I am looking for people that want to put rooftop solar on their commercial industrial facilities or ground next to the facility, and landowners who want to consider developing community solar farms or small utility scale solar farms on their Midwest farm ground. That includes Illinois, Ohio, Wisconsin, and Michigan. So please reach out to me. And with that, don't forget to give us a rating and review on Apple and Spotify so that more people can find our content. And please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you for listening, everybody. And let's grow solar and storage. I'm Tim Montague. Take care, John.